it is our honor to welcome His Eminence Mor Severus Roger Akhrass, Patriarchal Vicar and Director of the Syriac Studies Department at the Syriac Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch. His Eminence has long been involved in the work of theological dialogue and academic research within the Oriental Orthodox Communion, contributing both to pastoral formation and to interchurch understanding. As respondent, he will address 35 years after the Chambésy recommendations on pastoral issues in 1990, an assessment. Drawing on his deep pastoral and academic experience, His Eminence will reflect on what has been accomplished since this, what obstacles have persisted, and what practical lessons we can carry forward. Please join me in warmly welcoming His Eminence.
Good morning, Your Eminences, Reverend Fathers, dear sisters and brothers. I am honored and glad to be among you. I thank Father John, Elena, all the organizers of this wonderful conference. And I will be speaking today about an assessment of the recommendations on pastoral issues that were given by the Joint Pastoral Committee that was created by the Joint Theological Committee, and it presented its recommendation in September 1990 at Chambésy. And now, 35 years later, it is timely to ask what progress has been made in implementing these recommendations. I will not repeat the historical background of Amba Bishoy consultation or dialogue and then Chambésy in 89-90, but I will be focusing on the topics that the Joint Pastoral Subcommittee addressed in its report of 1990. So the report covered these topics: the exchange of visits, the exchange of professors and students, the joint publications, mutual recognition of baptism and marriage, participation in worship, and use of church buildings. So it is this document, often overshadowed by the Christological agreements, that forms the focus of my present assessment. First, the exchange of visits. The Chambésy recommendations urged regular exchange of visits among patriarchs, bishops, clergy, and faithful, both as an expression of brotherhood and as a preparation for future unity. In practice, this has been one of the most successful areas of implementation. The Syriac Orthodox Church provides illustrative examples. Patriarch Zakka I visited the Ecumenical Patriarch Demetrios in 1982, even before the official dialogue began, and later he met with the primates of the following churches: Constantinople, Antioch, Russia, Greece, and Cyprus. Our current Patriarch, Ephraim II, has continued this pattern, meeting with the heads of churches of Constantinople, Antioch, Russia, Greece, and Serbia. So you can guess who is missing on this list, and we can ask why. Such encounters, though symbolic, are of profound pastoral value. They make visible to clergy and faithful that estranged churches can relate as brothers, not rivals. They also help overcome suspicion and mistrust inherited from centuries of polemics. The next point, exchange of professors and students. Another recommendation was to encourage academic exchange and revise theological curriculum and books used in the theological institutions. This too has seen tangible progress, though uneven. The Church of Greece played a notable role, and Professor Christos Voulgaris taught at the St. Ephraim Theological Seminary in Syria. while numerous Syriac Orthodox seminarians, monks, and nuns studied in Athens and Thessaloniki. St. Vladimir's Seminary, New York, has since the mid-60s hosted Oriental Orthodox students alongside their Eastern Orthodox fellows, fostering friendships and intellectual cross-pollination. We have the example also I learned of the Holy Cross Institute here with presence of Oriental Orthodox students. And we know also about the St. Ignatius College and Theological Academy in Sweden since 2018, which created an innovative framework where professors and students from both families interact in a diaspora context. Nevertheless, not all experiences were positive. Some Oriental Orthodox seminarians in Greece reported being labeled monophysites by professors insufficiently acquainted with the dialogue documents. This highlights the need to incorporate the Chambésy agreed statements into curricula across Orthodox theological institutions. At St. Ephraim Theological Seminary in Syria, students take a course on ecumenism that covers the agreed statements. This year I have taught this course myself. Publications and teaching. Chambésy urged the publication of materials introducing the history and theology of each church, as well as the dialogue documents themselves. Here the contribution of Christine Chaillot, who is among us, has been outstanding. Through numerous studies, she has made the Oriental Orthodox churches better known in both East and West, and has also published the text of the agreed statements accompanied by valuable articles. Among her contributions is a significant study on the veneration of icons in the different Oriental Orthodox churches, a theme of particular importance for the Eastern Orthodox in connection with their Seventh Ecumenical Council. The documents of the dialogue, especially the agreed statements, are available on the website Orthodox Joint Commission. It would be beneficial, however, that these texts also appear on the official websites of all the Orthodox churches. We heard this proposition yesterday from Bishop Gabriel as well. So to appear on all the official websites of all Orthodox churches from both families, as has already been done on the website of the Department of Syriac Studies in the Syriac Orthodox Patriarchate. Some Syriacs in Germany and Sweden turned to Byzantine Orthodox iconographer from Poland, Ukraine, Romania, and Sweden for the renewal of Syriac icons. Thus, in 1998, the Polish Orthodox Monastery of the Annunciation in Suprazil restored the icon of the nursing Virgin from the 6th century, originally from the monastery of the Syrians in Wadi al-Natrun. In Sweden, the Orthodox iconographer Robin Johansson, that you can see on this picture, painted icons of the Annunciation, the baptism, and the descent from the cross for Syriac persons in Berlin and in Sweden. So you can see the original Syriac icons from the 13th century and how it became now in Sweden in one of the Syriac Orthodox churches, painted by a Greek Orthodox iconographer. And by contrast, a Syriac Orthodox from Sweden, Joseph Aslan, sells in Golpia to Eastern Orthodox bishops and Syriac liturgical vestments to Byzantine deacons in Slovakia. You can see them on this picture. So in addition, some practical examples. Now I turn to another point, recognition of baptism and marriage. The Chambésy recommendations called for mutual recognition of baptism with no rebaptism of faithful entering from one family into the other. The Syriac Orthodox practice is to never rebaptize Eastern Orthodox. The Coptic Orthodox practice is to recognize baptisms of Eastern Orthodox churches who officially accepted the agreed statements on Christology. So the Alexandrian, Antiochian, and Romanian faithful. But to rebaptize others, but implementation varies locally. For the Eastern Orthodox practice, the Russian Church follows since the 17th century the Canon 95 of the Council in Trullo of 692, receiving Oriental Orthodox without rebaptism by a profession of faith only. The Russian approach recognizes that the Oriental Orthodox churches have valid orders and therefore also a valid sacrament of baptism and chrismation. The Greek Church is divided. The 1755 decree of Patriarch Syriac V of Constantinople mandated rebaptism, but since the 20th century, chrismation has generally sufficed, though Athonite influence still supports strict akrivia. The recognition of baptism directly affects mixed marriages. Where baptism is accepted, marriages are recognized. A notable example is the 2001 Alexandria Agreement between the Coptic and Greek Orthodox Patriarchates, providing mutual recognition of marriages performed in either churches. Next point, participation in worship. This area remains the most sensitive. Chambésy urged participation in each other's Eucharistic liturgies on Sundays and feasts with these words, I quote, "In localities where churches of the two families coexist, the congregations should organize participation of one group of people, men, women, youth, and children, including priests where possible, from one congregation of one family to a congregation of the other, to attend in the latter's Eucharistic worship on Sundays and feast days." End of quote. In practice, this recommendation was never achieved. A more realistic model emerged in the 1991 agreement between the Greek Orthodox and the Syriac Orthodox Patriarchates of Antioch. It provided that, first, if only one priest is available, he may serve the divine liturgy and all sacraments for the faithful of both churches. And second, if two priests are present, but only one church building exists, they should alternate services. In reality, the first clause has occasionally been implemented, while the second, so to alternate services, too ambitious, has never been practiced. In the diaspora, informal practices exist. Some Eastern Orthodox bishops discreetly allow Oriental Orthodox to receive communion and vice versa, especially in mixed parishes. However, these practices remain local, unofficial, and dependent on the personal judgment of bishops and priests. In contexts where different communities coexist, attitudes tend to be characterized by moderation. By contrast, in confessionally uniform societies, where one Orthodox church constitutes an overwhelming majority, attitudes toward ecumenism are generally marked by resistance or, at best, indifference. And such a restrictive trend is visible in the Russian Orthodox Church's 2024 draft document on prayer with non-Orthodox Christians, which forbids common prayer and concelebration based on apostolic canons and more recent ones. I will not read this document, but just to mention it quickly. The draft document reflects a conservative isolationist sentiments. It represents a retreat from earlier ecumenical openness of the Russian Church and illustrates the tension between ecumenical theology and ecclesial politics. 7-point sharing of church buildings. Chambésy recommended facilitating the use of church buildings by the other family. In practice, such sharing between the two Orthodox families is rare, as each church generally has access to buildings within its own ecclesial family, whether Eastern or Oriental. Nevertheless, positive examples can be noted. So in Antioch, local arrangements have allowed occasional use of buildings by the other church. We heard now in the diaspora in the US some examples. In Russia, the Moscow Patriarchate offered the Coptic Orthodox Church a church in Moscow, St. Mark, and the Coptic Patriarchate described the church as the first official Coptic church in Russia and a concrete fruit of the bilateral joint commission. And in Egypt, in return, the Coptic Patriarchate granted the Russian Orthodox use of the church of St. Mina in Giza. Such gestures embody the Chambésy spirit of practical fraternity and pastoral cooperation. Critical issues and challenges. Despite many positive developments, several obstacles persist. First, divergence in canonical application. Some churches apply oikonomia, pastoral flexibility, others akrivia, especially concerning baptism. Second, from suspicion to retrenchment. Widespread suspicion of ecumenism is in homogeneous Orthodox settings where dialogue is easily cast as syncretism or compromise, has paved the way for a new retrenchment. And the Russian draft I mentioned of 2024 illustrates this trajectory, signaling a turn towards isolation that contrasts with the more open pastoral approach of earlier decades. Third, the diaspora realities. Addressing contemporary pastoral challenges requires a renewed ecclesiological approach in relation to current contexts. An illustrative example is the principle of one city, one bishop, which originated in Antioch, where two episcopal communities, Jewish and Gentile, were eventually united under the leadership of St. Ignatius, who articulated the need for a single episcopal authority to preserve unity. This principle, one city, one bishop, subsequently acquired greater significance in the face of heretical movements, serving as a safeguard of orthodoxy. In the modern context of the diaspora, however, characterized by the presence of multiple Orthodox bishops from different liturgical traditions and languages, a strict application of this norm proves problematic. Rather, it appears necessary for each ecclesial community to be shepherded by its own bishop. For example, a Coptic bishop for the Copts, an Armenian bishop for the Armenians. We heard yesterday it was difficult for the Armenian to celebrate with the Coptics or Syriacs, while still maintaining broader ecclesial communion. So the Syriac Orthodox perspective on ecumenism, I will skip this point to go to my next point, ecclesial and canonical considerations. A sustainable model of unity requires more than theological agreement. It requires a renewed ecclesiology and ecumenical hermeneutics. So for ecumenical hermeneutics, a careful conceptual analysis of councils and canons requires interpreting them within their historical contexts, particularly the 7 councils designated as ecumenical by the Eastern Orthodox. The enumeration of 7 ecumenical councils should be understood not as a universal norm, but as a tradition specific to the Byzantine Church. The Oriental Orthodox churches, in dialogue with the Anglican Communion, have produced a document on the inheritance of ecumenical councils that articulates their position. Eastern Orthodox brothers are encouraged to engage with this text in order to better appreciate the Oriental Orthodox perspective without seeking to impose a uniform enumeration of the ecumenical councils, an issue deeply intertwined with identity and history, and therefore not subject to change. In this light, the response of the Greek Orthodox Synod in 1994 to the agreed statements is regrettable, as it sought to enforce recognition of the 7 councils, a position that remains unacceptable to the Oriental Orthodox. Like we accepted to say, you can say one nature, two nature, let us accept to say, you say 3 ecumenical or 7 ecumenical councils, both would be acceptable. And the second point, ecclesiology of communion. Unity must not mean uniformity or merger, but communion in faith and sacraments, with diversity of traditions preserved. The Oriental Orthodox model of communion, where each church retains its rite and hierarchy, may provide inspiration. Conclusion. 35 years after Chambésy, the record is mixed. Considerable progress has been made in visits, academic exchanges, local gestures of sharing and mutual understanding. Yet pastoral implementation remains uneven and fragile. The path forwards requires 1. Deepening reception of the agreed statements in theological education, 2. Clarifying canonical practice, especially regarding baptism and marriage, make it official and open, 3. Developing new ecclesiological models for the diaspora, and 4. Resisting the temptation to retreat into isolationism. The goal is not structural merger, but visible communion, the recognition of each other as fully Orthodox, the acceptance of sacraments, and the sharing of the Eucharist. Liturgical plurality will remain, but unity will be manifested whenever clergy from both families celebrate together in the rite of the hosting church. This is not a utopian vision, but a retrieval of the ancient church's practice of unity in diversity. Chambésy gave us a roadmap. It remains our task to walk it faithfully. Thank you.